Alright, dude. Listen, I've talked highly of the past couple Marvel movies I've covered. Even the first Iron Man is one of my favorite MCU movies. But golly, man, what happened? This movie is a disaster. Iron Man 2 is a disaster. It makes no sense. There's no goal, there's no objective, there's no real story that takes place. It seems like a random assortment of scenes that all compiled to create a 2-hour-long demo reel of what a bad Iron Man movie would be. I am shocked that this is the movie that was created and released. Marvel Studios gave Jon Favreau and his team about 2 years to make Iron Man 2, instead of 3 like the first Iron Man movie, to create a film that's bigger and better than the first. Marvel was desperately latching onto the success of the first movie, trying to catch lightning in a bottle again and create a whole new Iron Man story that just as, if not more successful than the first. Trying to cram in Whiplash, Justin Hammer, S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Widow, Nick Fury, Tony's palladium poisoning, Tony creating a whole new element, Tony and Rhodey's relationship, Tony and Pepper's relationship, Tony and his dad's relationship. It just didn't work. Iron Man 2 is made up of a dozen different concepts that, if they were explored individually, could come out to be some of the most interesting superhero ideas of all time. The main villain of the story is sorta Justin Hammer, sorta Whiplash. I think it's Whiplash because he's the guy to use any sort of power on Tony, and he's the last guy to do so as well. So we'll count Whiplash, or Ivan Vanko, as the main antagonist of the story.
I want my book.
Ivan's father died because of the actions of Tony's father, Howard Stark, so Ivan takes it upon himself to destroy the Stark name. Ivan is an evil version of Tony. He takes the archive technology of the arc reactor, and similar to the first movie, Ivan creates his demonized version of the Iron Man armor in a dimly lit place using scrap pieces of metal. Tony and Ivan's stories are similar, burnt by the Stark legacy, trying to find their place in the world and creating a suit of armor to harm those who have put them in bondage. This whole concept is so interesting. Whiplash, being this dark side of Tony's Iron Man, holds a whole world of possibilities to explore the Stark legacy, a concept we explored in the first Iron Man video. Pitting these two driven intellectual beings who believe that they deserve the world and will do anything to obtain it, while still being the heroes of their own stories, is brilliant. Contextualizing that Tony's father might not have been the godlike figure the modern day makes him out to be because of his treatment of his Russian business partner, Anton Vanko, and now both of their sons are reaping the consequences of those actions. Now, this would have been great stuff if it wasn't for Justin Hammer being shoehorned into the plot, simply to make this bright, shining new futurist genius snappy inventor a pale reflection of what Tony is. Why did this story have two evil versions of Iron Man? One is already enough. If you wanted to create a villain to be the foil to Iron Man, then just make one single villain to do so. Take Justin Hammer and Whiplash and combine them into one single villain who was burnt by the Stark legacy, has the knowledge and resources to create the Iron Man suit or a villainized version of it, be smart enough to go toe-to-toe with Tony, but also strong enough to be a formidable opponent to Iron Man. Very simple idea. You have the Stark legacy connection, you have the drive and motivation, you have the characterization and physical attributes, all to create one good villain. But no, instead we have a weird bird-loving Whiplash who has this weird motivations. All he wanted to do was hurt Tony, and he did, so mission accomplished. Then we have Justin Hammer, whose main goal is to hurt the Stark legacy by recruiting Whiplash to make tons of drones, and these drones only act as an army of mindless soldiers for the heroes to destroy during the final battle. These characters are like the same. They're the exact same. Why have two? Why literally why have two?
I want my book.
Iron Man 2 is made up of a dozen different concepts that, if they were explored individually, could come out to be some of the most interesting superhero ideas of all time. Actually giving Iron Man's demon in a bottle depiction on screen in the form of palladium poisoning, as Jarvis says,
"Unfortunately, the device that's keeping you alive is also killing you."
way to be a little bit on the nose, Jarvis, but this concept is so interesting. Tony's metal contraption that was created to keep the shrapnel out of his heart is now the very thing that is shortening his life. That's so interesting. Tony is physically learning that in order to stay alive, he needs to create a new element that would sustain his condition. But it's Tony emotionally learning that he needs to move on from the past, understand that he's not invincible, and that he needs to help as many people as he can as long as he's alive. But instead, the blood toxicity level is brought up for the last time at the 51-minute mark. And at the 1 hour and 27-minute mark, Tony creates the new element. And then at the 137-minute mark, he's healed. Great, fantastic. Can we see Tony's reaction to this life-saving element? Can we actually have a visual representation of blood toxicity levels going down? I know we see the lines going away, but where's Tony's emotion in all this? It's supposed to be this cool, triumphant moment. Felt like it could have been the perfect time for Tony to just slow down and realize what he's just done, realize what he has to do now, and have a little moment of joy to himself. Sure, Howard Stark may not have been the best role model of all time, but 20 years later, he's still able to show Tony's best side of himself. Iron Man 2 is made up of a dozen different concepts, and if they were explored individually, could come out to be some of the most interesting superhero ideas of all time. Iron Man 2 explores Tony and his dad's relationship so in depth with like 2 or 3 scenes in this movie, which is more than the rest of the MCU except for Endgame, but we'll get there someday. We know as the audience that Tony has always been estranged from his father. As Tony puts it,
he was cold, he was calculating. He never told me he loved me, he never even told me he liked me. So it's a little tough for me to digest when you're telling me he said the whole future was riding on me and he's passing it down. I don't get that.
Tony's harsh relationship with the pseudo Walt Disney has drastically and negatively changed his life. Tony learned in the first movie that he needs to be a better person and promote peace. This movie is about how he has peace within himself. How does Tony overcome his fear of not living up to his father? Tony at his lowest point, he turns on the projector to see some of the last remnants of what his father has left for him. The projector turns on, and it rolls, and it's just another presentation taping. But at the end of the film, Howard takes one last look at the camera and says,
"My greatest creation is you."
Out of all the inventions Stark Industries has made, out of all the accomplishments and milestones Howard Stark has done, Tony is still his greatest invention. This is powerful, cathartic stuff here in Iron Man 2. Tony now has a new perspective on life, new perspective on his father, and a new perspective on himself. Now, this stuff would have been really, really good if it wasn't for Tony taking the map layout of whatever this place is, turning it vertically, and figuring out that this was Howard Stark's new plan for a new element. Like the centerpiece globe is supposed to be the nucleus of an atom of a new element that Howard was working on. And Tony actually synthesizes that new element, which is never named as far as I'm aware of. And of course, that one element that he created was the one element that was suitable for a palladium replacement for the arc reactor in his chest. Yes, I get it. As soon as Tony walks off stage at the Stark Expo, he checks his blood toxicity level that the palladium he uses in the arc reactor in his chest is killing him, while behind him, the Howard Stark video is being presented, focusing in the idea that Howard Stark and the weight of legacy is bearing down on Tony and killing him, being physically represented in the form of the blood toxicity levels. Like, yes, of course I get it. But this concept is so bogged down by the mental gymnastics the audience has to perform because of the odd storytelling. Maybe in my version of Iron Man 2, at the beginning of the film, there's a scene where Tony is struggling to understand his place in the world. He just revealed to the world that he's Iron Man, and now the palladium is dirtying up his heart. We can still have the scene at the Stark Expo, and afterwards S.H.I.E.L.D. comes in and brings and drops off the case. Nick Fury and Tony have the talk to, one, set up where Tony is at emotionally in this film, and two, set up whatever his father has left for him is something big and could change the world. Tony refuses to look inside the case for the majority of the movie due to negligence, but once he finally does, he discovers that Howard was working on a new element to supplement the arc reactor once they were complete. Oh, would you look at that? Sure, coincidence, but it makes way more sense than Tony figuring out even the existence of the plans and then making the new element all in like 5 minutes. Now it's time for everybody's favorite part of the show, where I compare what I previously thought about the Marvel project to what I would think about it now that I've watched it again. Iron Man 2, indescribably bad, so stupid, and randomly rushed. Yep, I 100% agree with myself. Very bad, and one of the most disappointing sequels of the modern film era. Very, very stupid, and random things happen, like Tony randomly deciding he's racing in Monaco, And it's crazy that in the script, we're not even told about the race in Monaco before the movie actually cuts to that location. Ivan Vanko is handed a brochure about the race, but we as the audience had zero prior knowledge about this event. So in that scene, we're just weirdly looking at a brochure, wondering what's going on. And then we cut to Monaco. This movie's so rushed. It's so bad. It's so random. It's so. Thank you guys so much for listening, watching, having fun watching my new Iron Man 2 review. We are 3 projects down and a lot more to go, but we're almost done with phase 1. Woo! And as always, like, comment, subscribe, and take a look at my Patreon. Some good stuff there. I thank y'all for the support. See ya.
I want my book.